What is up, everyone? It's been a minute, but I am back. I'm your girl T. This is Not Your Average Podcast in the 716. We are on the Built in Buffalo Network. Go over there and check out some amazing content Monday through Friday. I know it's the off season and it might not be Monday through Friday, but normally we are 7 days a week. But this is the Division Series, and I have someone from Miami, and I'm just going to let him introduce himself.
Yeah, T, I really appreciate you inviting me to come on for this, division preview series. I am Eric Smith, contributor on 5 Reasons Sports. Also have a Dolphins podcast that I'm a co-host of called Scouting the Fins, and also have a YouTube channel, at my handle that's there on the screen at OL Coach Smith 63. Mostly Miami Dolphins stuff, but there is some general, just offensive line stuff as well. So if trench play interests you, come over and check it out.
Cool. Awesome. I did go and check your YouTube channel out. Man, you guys put that work in. Like, you seriously put that work in. And I have a question. I didn't put it in the topics because I wanted to get your off the head, off the dome response to it, but it's like later on a question I want from you and about your O-line. But let's get into it. Let's go backwards for a bit. Going into last season, how confident were you in Mike McDaniel assembling a winning team?
Yeah, so I think, kind of step back before 2024. You look at McDaniel's first year, they went 9-8 and they lost to the Bills in the wild card game where they had Skylar Thompson playing at quarterback. And then 2023, improved to 11-6, kind of had a late season collapse with a shell of an offensive line. And, same deal with the edge rushing room. And they lost to Kansas City in that historically cold game, right? So you get to 2024 and, 2023 was the first season that Tua was fully healthy.
Mm-hmm.
You had Tyreek coming off of his 2 best individual seasons as a pro, Raheem Mostert returning, who led the league in rushing touchdown in 2023. You had Devon Achane going to his second year after averaging 7.8 yards per carry as a rookie. Expected to get your edge rushers back in Jalen Phillips and Bradley Chubb. It was supposed to be a year that Miami really got over that playoff win hump and, made a deep push into the playoffs, not just winning a game. What you ended up with was, Tua missing more games again. You had Tyreek dealing with a wrist injury and then multiple off-field incidents, including being detained literally, minutes before the week 1 game.
Weird.
Had domestic disputes, and then report to him being late to meetings and not participating in practice. Raheem Mostert gets injured. Austin Jackson goes out after 8 games. Talking about the edge rushers, Jalen Phillips had a kind of a, I don't want to say a miracle recovery, but ahead of schedule with the ruptured Achilles. He's back for 4 games and then has a season-ending knee injury. Bradley Chubb never comes back. You have David Long, who was a key part of the defense in 2023 and took a step so far back that he got, released during the season. It all kind of accumulated with finishing below 500 at 8-9 with the loss to the Jets in a game that was winnable, but Miami needed help to make it into the playoffs. And it was pretty clear that afternoon as their scoreboard watching that, they weren't going to get the help they needed.
Right.
When you talk about how confident I was in it, I was really looking forward to 2024, and it was a huge letdown. There's definitely been a lot of carryover in that feeling heading over into 2025.
Okay. I didn't have this on, but speaking of the culture, that's what Miami, and it's kind of been a thing, right? It's like you don't talk about it. How now do you see the change happening? Do you see the coach stepping up and saying, okay, everybody needs to be present, everybody needs to be one in on this culture in order for us to have a winning culture here in Miami?
I mean, anytime you have talks of culture change, it's all talk at this part of the offseason. Everybody's going to say the right things. I mean, they said the right things heading into 2024 and then came out this year and said they were lying about it. In terms of what you can see, I think you see a move towards the type of players that really embody what they're trying to do. Mike McDaniel is never going to come out and just be a, disciplinarian, shout, the Mike Vrabel type, if you want to make comparison. He's not going to be that guy, but you don't have to be that guy. But you have to have a team that backs you up. Like, if your star player is, being late to practice and everybody sees that and nobody else is really correcting it, then everybody else is going to follow that as well. So I think a lot of the roster moves that we've had both in and out this offseason have kind of been around that and, kind of letting some of the guys go that maybe didn't, fit what they're looking to do and, bringing in guys that continue to emphasize that. So, I think there are signs of a move in the right direction. But one of the big culprits was obviously Tyreek was kind of the center of that, and he's still here. So it is what it is for now. It's all talk, and it's not even going to be a deal that as we get into training camp that we're going to know. Right, we're not going to know until they hit a losing streak if they have to face that adversity. And you never know when that's actually going to happen.
Exactly. That's true. Staying on last year, the Miami Dolphins was the second oldest team in the NFL, and you guys have some releases and some free agents that you didn't pick up. Were you okay with the moves that they made this offseason?
Yeah. Overall, I was. I think that one of the videos that I had done the offseason for the Dolphins was looking at the roster year over year and looking at the the different players that played the highest snaps. And the Dolphins have been making a steady improvement in that, even though it might not feel like it. I think that what you're getting going to 2025 is still a lot of the same. The big one right now that is probably on the way out and doesn't feel like they've replaced it would be Jaylen Ramsey.
Mm-hmm.
I think that for me is the big one that we're treating him as Dolphins fans as somebody that's not on the team because, fully expecting him to be traded. Seems like whatever differences there are not reconcilable. When you go through some of the other players, like Raheem Mostert is going to be replaced by Jalen Wright.
Mm-hmm.
Moving up into that spot. You got Durham Smythe, who, was kind of phased out. Teron Armstead was a guy that they drafted his replacement last year, and Patrick Paul. The guards, they've drafted one, signed one that should both be upgrades. Calais Campbell, obviously a huge loss from a leadership perspective. But I think that from the on-field stuff, Calais Campbell, good player. Don't have anything bad to say about him.
Right.
But he wasn't the player in his elite phase of his career. Right. Solid contributor. So I think the guys that they brought in are going to do a good enough job of replacing what he did on the field, in addition to, guys that, they got guys on the interior like the Kenneth Grants and the Jordan Phillips that are going to replace what Campbell did on the inside. And then you have Jalen Phillips and Bradley Chubb coming back healthy that are going to replace what he did on the edge in terms of being on the field. And then, the other big overhaul there was the safety room.
Mm-hmm.
And that was, Javon Holland, who really had a good rookie year with the Dolphins, and his second year was pretty good too. And then he kind of, I don't want to make the statement that he wasn't buying in, but it definitely felt that way. Like you had, when Fangio left, the whole kicking rocks thing, and, Holland saying that wasn't about him. And then he never, it rebounded back to his form under Weaver either. I don't think that any Dolphin fans were disappointed in seeing Javon Holland move on this offseason. And then they, brought in former Bill Jordan Poyer, who was like public enemy number one for Dolphins fans. So, even though there's a overhaul at that position group when, bringing in Ashton Davis and Ife Melifonwu, there's unknown there, but it's kind of hard to look at it and say that the Dolphins are going to take a step back compared to what that position group did in 2024.
Gotcha. Okay. Now, I know the talk is Tua. It's always Tua because he's the head of the offense. Do you have buyer's remorse? Do you think that fans have buyer's remorse when it comes to Tua?
Do I? No. Do a lot of fans? Absolutely. And, that was even before the contract. Like, he's a very polarizing figure. And a lot of that has to do, obviously, the injuries are a big part of it. and the fact that he doesn't just look like if you're building a quarterback in a lab, he doesn't look like that type of quarterback. He doesn't have that type of arm. The stuff that the Tua fans are going to prop up, or the stuff that you don't necessarily, see in a scouting combine or anything like that. But for me, I've been a fan of Tua since his Alabama days. In that draft, he was with the injury, I probably would have gone Burrow, but that was more of a pipe dream. But with Burrow off the board, I had Tua above Herbert and any of the other quarterbacks. And the team, I think, was in a tough spot with the timing of when they had to complete that extension, right? You could have forced him to play out that 5th year of the contract, but if he had repeated his 2023 form, then that number was just going to, skyrocket even more.
Right.
And really, when you look at the number, even now, right, it's the quarterback contracts are always resetting the market.
Yep.
The being healthy is something that obviously continues to plague him, but as it stands, I think the team is in an okay position with the contract because, if he balls out in 2025, then, there's no guaranteed money after 2025 after 2026. So if he does well in 2025, they can come back and say, look, you got to do this again. You got to stay healthy in 2026 before we even talk about, touching that contract. And if it, goes off the rails again, then you're probably blowing everything up, right? McDaniel's going to be gone. Tua is going to be gone. Maybe Weaver sticks around. Chris Greer is going to be gone, right? So you're going to, with only 1 year remaining after 2025 of guaranteed money, it wouldn't be comfortable. But if you're in a full rebuild mode anyways, you could get off that contract, pretty quickly.
Right. Yeah, I think that's the whole argument when it comes to Miami Dolphins is the Tua situation. Like fans are really split down the middle when it comes to Tua. Sticking on your quarterback in your quarterback room, you guys picked up Zach Wilson. We know Zach Wilson. We all know Zach Wilson. I personally don't like him, but anyway, he beat us. But I heard Mike McDaniel actually wanted Zach Wilson. Give me your reaction to the signing of Zach Wilson.
Yeah, so I don't think it was just Mike McDaniel. Like there was rumors that all of those Shanahan style coaches, right? So your Kyle Shanahan, your McVay, your LaFleur, all of those guys thought very highly of Zach Wilson. Me personally, kind of indifferent on the move. The question that when we looked at the new quarterback too, the question that I wanted to answer was, can you expect a better record in 2025 if that quarterback needs to play over what you would have with Tyler Huntley? And, looking at Zach Wilson and what we know about him today, I don't know that I can say that I can expect a better record with Zach Wilson than we would have had with Tyler Huntley. But, talking through those scenarios that we just did with Tua, if he can't stay healthy and he forces the hand of the team in terms of moving on, then you have a young, talented quarterback in the building who you can use your own firsthand information to make a judgment whether he's worth investing further or not. It's kind of a departure from what they did in 2019 when they traded a 2nd-round pick for Josh Rosen because they had absolutely nothing in the quarterback room and they weren't in position to draft a top one. So I think, in terms of 2025, I feel like, kind of stayed even, not necessarily up or down in terms of quarterback 2, but like the upside that he, could provide with his physical talents and hopefully with some, Mike McDaniel magic.
Right. Oh man, you said Josh Rosen. That's a name that Bills fans, we were split down the middle when it came to Josh's, and a lot of us wanted Josh Rosen. I was included in that, and I'm glad we picked the right Josh.
Yeah, absolutely, you did.
Yeah. Let's move on to Tyreek Hill. This might be his last season with the Miami Dolphins. What's the latest? What's going on with Tyreek Hill?
Yeah, so before the 2024 season, when the Dolphins were handing out contract extension to everybody, Tyreek was included in that. And had they not handed out that extension, they could have moved on from Tyreek this year after, the comments at the end of the year,
Mm-hmm.
the issues throughout the year. But because of that extension before 2024, the team was really tied to him for 2025, no matter what.
Right.
Right. And maybe if the comments at the end of the season about wanting out were the only thing that you had with Tyreek, maybe you could chalk it up to being in the heat of the moment when he really didn't want to talk to the media and was pushed into it. But there's just been, so many incidents, and it wasn't just last year, right? It was just that they weren't as loud the years before because he was putting up 1,700 yards and,
Right.
really producing. But it's wearing thin on fans.
Mm-hmm.
If he bounces back and he has another 1,500-yard season, then I'm sure that nobody's really going to care. But I feel like regardless of how the season goes, that 2025 is probably going to be his last one. And I mean, heading into 2025, he seems to have, had that come to Jesus moment discussion with Mike McDaniel. He's saying and doing the right things. When Tyreek arrived here in 2023, no, 2022, he came in and they really talked about him being the guy that set the tempo at practice,
Mm-hmm.
really challenging guys. It seems like he's kind of back to that form, maybe refocused. He had 2 surgeries this offseason
Right.
on his wrist that was injured. And I think that was a bigger factor in his drop in production than most people give it credit for. He just now during OTAs last week began to catch passes again, but he's not participating in team drills. But McDaniel talked about how he's still participating in drills in terms of running the routes, getting the timing down, even though the ball's not being thrown to him and having him catch it. And then, he got married in 2023, but he's already his wife filed for a divorce here in 2025. So I'm not, trying to celebrate that in any
Mm-hmm.
way, but
Mm-hmm.
when we're putting it into a vacuum and what we're going to have for Tyreek in 2025, hopefully we're getting the guy that is locked into football and football only.
Right. Speaking of players, right? You have a player, and you spoke about Ramsey, and I didn't put this on there, but what's the situation right now? Is there a trade on the table? Are you hearing anything when it comes to Jaylen Ramsey situation?
Yeah, I think there are some offers out there. I don't think that we're going to get a whole lot for him, right? We're not going to get a second or a third round pick or anything like that. When you look at back to what the Dolphins gave up to get him, it was basically a third round pick and a throw-in player in Hunter Long. And,
Right.
and that was, 3 years ago, a player so he was younger then.
Mm-hmm.
And he has kind of extended his track record of, forcing his way out of teams when he's tired of them. So I think that whoever is looking to get him already knows that he's probably only a 2 or 3 year rental until he's pushing out of there as well. So nobody really wants to give up a lot for that. I do think there is a market for Jaylen Ramsey. I think there's probably a few offers out there. A big sticking point is going to be the money that he's owed, particularly for 2025. Seems like a lot of the holdup right now may be how much of that Miami is going to pay as part of that trade, because there's probably going to be some sort of restructure to his contract as part of the trade. And that's where Ramsey really still holds a lot of leverage with it too. Like a lot of fans just say, one, either make him play, which you can't do because you already last year when he wanted his contract restructured, they, he had a phantom lower body injury that suddenly disappeared as soon as the contract was reset.
Right.
So, if you send him somewhere he doesn't want to be, that's exactly what he's going to do there. And the teams that are trading for him know that, right? So he has to give his blessing. The team has to feel confident that Ramsey's not going to, sit out from day one like a Hassan Reddick type deal that the Jets were dealing with there.
Right.
But I think that, so I think there's a few teams, right? The Steelers, I think the Raiders have been in there. The Rams have been in there. There's a few teams that have been rumored, but I'm not sure how close it is. Maybe the Jair Alexander move, creates a little bit of movement in that.
I was going to ask you that. Were you shocked that you guys didn't get him? Jaylen Alexander?
I was not. And so my reason for it is obviously they have a need at cornerback. But when we talked at the opening about the culture change
Mm-hmm.
and, signing a Jair Alexander, both from a health and a culture change perspective, would kind of fly very much in the face of that. Like he's only played, I think, barely 50% of the games
Right.
over the last 4 seasons. So that, there's a health issue there. That, there was the incident in Green Bay where he inserted himself as a captain for the pregame coin toss, and then I think he
Wow.
almost like screwed up the coin toss and did opposite of what the coaches wanted before the coaches had a conversation with the officials and got it corrected. But if you've got a guy that on game day is doing that kind of stuff, like
Mm-hmm.
that makes me really hesitant to bring him into the room. And just watching his film for me personally, when I looked at what he did in 2024, I didn't feel like it was close to the same player that he was back in 2022. So me personally, I was um, not disappointed that the Dolphins weren't heavily into that. I think
Mm-hmm.
there was a little bit of interest there. The Dolphins had talked to him, but I think that they were waiting for the Ramsey situation to sort out, and I'm not sure that they would have been the highest bidder even after the Ramsey situation.
Okay. This upcoming season, what direction do you see or want to see Miami um go towards this upcoming 2025 season?
I mean, obviously, it's going to depend on the health of Tua. Like everything circles around that. But
Mm-hmm.
you can add in the health of the offensive line, which it's been its own issue the past 2 seasons, as well as the health of the edge rushers in Jalen Phillips and Bradley Chubb.
Right.
You've got a secondary that's been 100% overhauled. Well, not 100% because Cater Kohu's still here, but everybody else has been overhauled over the last 2 years. And when you look on paper, it's probably the worst secondary in the league
Mm-hmm.
on paper, right?
Right.
But again, as we talked about earlier, I feel like if you do an entire state of the roster evaluation on the Dolphins, you're going to find that there's some positions that are better, there's some positions that are worse, but I don't see this roster being significantly worse or better than what it was in 2024. I think that the roster overall, right, is similarly talented to what they had in 2024 when we had all those high expectations that were derailed because of injuries.
Right.
Not necessarily just a failure to live up to expectations. And another thing is that I don't think that you can overstate the importance that for the Dolphins, 2025 is going to be the first season since 2015 that the offensive and defensive coordinator from the previous season are both returning. Every
Oh
year, it's either
wow.
been cycling through offensive coordinators or defensive coordinators. So, we had McDaniels, obviously
Mm-hmm.
I mean, Frank Smith is technically the offensive coordinator, but it's Mike
Right.
McDaniel and Anthony Weaver, and those guys are both returning. First time in a decade that both
That's
sides of the ball.
crazy.
Yeah, and that's been a huge part of the inconsistency
Mm-hmm.
with what Miami has done. And I think that, like I said, I don't think that can be overstated. I think that's going to
Right.
be a key in terms of being able to be competitive in 2025.
Consistency, and that's what Josh had for his first few years, and then of
Yep.
course they changed it, and then they changed it again. But that you need that for your quarterback to be consistent,
Yes.
to have that that offensive coordinator there for a few years, to develop that quarterback. um Let me ask you, would you rather make the playoffs, lose I mean make the playoffs, lose, keep Mike McDaniels and Tua, or make the playoffs and fire your head coach and your GM?
I mean, I know that any Dolphin fan that's going to listen to this is going to say to fire them. Um, it would come. It's a tough question without context,
Well,
right?
I
Because
get you. I get you.
in like I have been an apologist in a way for the Dolphins over the past couple seasons in terms of the injuries that they've had between especially with the offensive line. Like that's a big thing for me, and continuity on the offensive line is key, and the Dolphins have not had that. The edge rushers, your premier positions on the defense, right? You've had significant injuries there. So if I don't know, like I guess if you go into year 3 of that and you're doing that again,
Mm-hmm.
you kind of make the bed that you lay in. And so I guess to answer your question, if we do that again, if we go 9-8, sneak into the playoffs and get the doors kicked in, then I'm probably ready to go ahead and call it quits and restart, as painful as that would be again.
Right. Now, do you think it's a thing with the cold weather with Miami, or you just think it's just the guy? Is it just nonsense that we're looking at, or
I mean,
with this team?
I'm not going to say it's not a thing, right? I
Mhm.
live in Pennsylvania,
Gotcha.
so I'm not too far south from Buffalo. We've made our trips up to Buffalo to watch the games in person, and we've also made the trip to Miami. And the weather is very different. I can tell you, as a northerner going down to Miami in September, like
Right.
that's a brutal trip to make. And it's the flip side too. Like if you're in Miami and even in the cold months, you're looking at 60-degree weather, and then you go to 30, it's a big difference. Do I think that it is a game changer? Not really.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe the records kind of say differently there, but I think that, Kansas City game aside, right? That is a
Right.
historically cold one. A team that plays in
Absolutely.
cold weather was
Right.
miserable in that game. But I think that, if you look at a lot of the other cold weather games, I can find reasons that I felt like the Dolphins lost those games that are way more significant than, the fact that they're playing in cold weather.
Right. Now I have to ask you. I didn't know you
Okay.
were in Pennsylvania.
All right.
What in the heck? How did you become a Miami Dolphins fan?
Fair question. So both of my parents actually grew up in Miami,
Oh, okay.
close to the stadium. My dad was in the Army,
Okay.
and we moved away. Like I was probably less than a year old when we moved out of Miami. I was born in Plantation, Florida, but I don't have any childhood memories of being in there. We ended up with him retiring medically here in Pennsylvania. But being a Dolphins fan is one of the things that has stuck with me through my life, and sometimes I'm a little pissed off at him for that, because it's been pretty painful. But hopefully one day it'll pay off.
Well, I mean, painful. We understand it here in Buffalo. I mean, we just recently turned it around, which is awesome and great. The kids don't understand that 17-year drought. As older fans, we're like, we don't want to go back to that. So you saying fire Sean McDermott, I'm like,
Right.
I don't know about that yet.
You've lived in that world.
Right. I've lived in that world. I'm good. Since you know how to assess O-line, give me your assessment of the Miami Dolphins O-line right now.
So
I know it's
big
early.
thing. No, you're good. There was a big thing last year. So there was a very famous quote by Chris Greer saying that, the fans or the reporters were more worried about the offensive line than the team was.
Mm-hmm.
And I had the offensive line that they had set up last year been able to go into the season and stay healthy, right? Had you had Isaiah Wynn starting the season at guard instead of having a setback to his injury and having to put Liam Eichenberg again, you had Austin Jackson going out again. I think they would have been okay up front, but you saw this year there was a re-emphasis on that, and part of the reason they gotten away from that was when McDaniel was hired. The Chris Greer and the existing staff wanted to continue to bolster the offensive line, and Mike McDaniel looked at the offense as a whole, and he's like, our issue is not the offensive line. It's that we need to get guys that can get into space for Tua to get them the ball. Right. So the emphasis was to go and get the Tyreek Hills and, the Devon Achans, those type of players. But obviously the line has not been able to stay healthy. It's been, kind of a disaster at times over the past 2 seasons. So there was a re-emphasis in that. You had, the foresight to know that 2024 was likely Teron Armstead's last year. They drafted Patrick Paul last year in the second round as the heir apparent. and there's questions with Patrick Paul, but I'm really optimistic about what he's going to be. I'm not going to sit here and say he's going to be a Pro Bowl left tackle and play to the level of Teron Armstead, but I think that his floor is basically an average offensive tackle. Like, I don't see a scenario where Patrick Paul goes out there and just is a complete mess. Austin Jackson is coming back after the knee injury from last year. He's got his own significant injury history, and can't necessarily be counted on, but he's a huge part of the run game. There was a big correlation from when he went out last year to the fall off in the rushing attack. Like, there was a series of games where you had the same 5 offensive linemen, I think it was 5 or 6 games right before Austin Jackson went out after the Buffalo game, where they were averaging over 150 yards rushing per game. And then Austin Jackson goes out and you have some, I think basically historically low numbers in terms of rushing for the Dolphins. So he's a big part of that running game. And then obviously you had some significant upgrades at guard. You're getting James Daniels, who is returning from a Achilles injury of his own, but very, very good leader. He's been very impressive in the interviews that I've seen. I think he's going to do a good job of replacing some of that leadership that we're going to lose with Teron Armstead. I think he's a good player. Not saying that he, again, not a Pro Bowl level player, but I think he's going to be a nice steadying force. And then we got the rookie Jonah Savaianaya. Always got to slow down when I say his name to get it right.
Right.
Maybe one day I won't have to, but really optimistic about his ability to play guard in this system. And he does have some tackle versatility. If, emergency situation he needs to kick out, wouldn't be the worst option to have out there. Wouldn't be any worse than putting Jackson Carman out there, which the Dolphins had to do for a game last year. And that was like the worst performance I've ever seen. But so overall, I like the pieces that they have on the offensive line, but a big part of that is going to come down to how Austin Jackson returns from his knee injury, how James Daniels returns from his Achilles injury. But I like the way that they've, kind of retooled that unit.
Oh, okay. Last question. The schedule is out. What's your schedule? I mean, what's your record? And where do you see the Dolphins finishing in this division?
Okay, so Tua has had a winning record every season for the games that he's played in. Unfortunately, he's only had one season where he's played all of those games. And in some of those seasons, the roster was definitely worse than what it is for 2025. So it's hard for me to accept anything less than 9-8. And if you've got Tua for all 17 games and, you don't have entire position groups that are, ravaged by injuries like they have in the past, I am an optimistic fan. I know some people are talking about, 6-7 wins for the Dolphins this year, but like I said, if Tua is healthy, I don't see worse than 9-8. And I'm leaning more towards a 10 or 11 win season for the Dolphins. But I, obviously concede that that's only going to be good enough for second place in the division until Miami shows the ability to get over the hump versus, the Josh Allen-led Buffalo Bills.
Right. Yeah, I seen in the division right now, I see that New England is second in the division. And I'm just, I can see it. But I can also see them finishing third. And like the division is tight. It's very, very, the competition, which I love because that just brings out more competition for people. So I can't wait. I mean, of course, people got the Bills as number one, whatever. But also too, I don't sleep on the fact that it could be anybody's division. It could be. So I like it. I do like the fact that now everybody is in the big pool and trying to get to where the quote unquote Buffalo Bills are. But I like competition for sure.
Yeah, I agree. I would rather the entire division be competitive and for the teams to be tested throughout the season.
Yes.
And that way, when you do get to those games in December and January, you're battle tested and you're ready to go. Whereas if you look at, a team, let's say the Buccaneers down there in the NFC South, it's essentially a cakewalk through that division with who they have there, right? Or the AFC South with the Texans. I would rather have more competitive games throughout the season and and earn your way there, right?
Mm-hmm.
If you can battle through those teams and you can make it to the divisional and the conference championship rounds, then you're ready for big time football. But if you're beating up on inferior teams throughout the year, which is kind of the knock on the Dolphins, that they win against the bad teams and lose against the good teams, right? Then when you get to the playoffs, and you're gonna probably get bounced in your first matchup.
It was just like the Kansas City Chiefs for the longest. They were beating everybody, and now I think that division now has some competition over there with Denver. So yeah, for sure. I thank you so much coming on the show, Eric. I really, really appreciate it. Tell everybody where they can find you and what's anything that's going on with you right now.
Yeah, absolutely. Again, I appreciate you having me on. It's a lot of fun. As far as finding me, again, my own personal YouTube channel at OL Coach Smith 63. Also a contributor on 5 Reasons Sports. You'll find me on their YouTube and also with some of their Twitter stuff. And then also Scouting the Fins is the podcast that I'm a co-host for. And that is also on the 5 Reasons YouTube and also on the 3 Yards Per Carry podcast feed.
Are you going to make a trip up to Buffalo for the game, or what are you guys doing?
Undecided. We did it last year. It was kind of a last minute type deal. We're actually season ticket holders for the Miami Dolphins, and we make a few trips down there every year because we've been to Buffalo in the cold, watching the Dolphins lose up there, and realize that with even still the prices to fly down to Miami and the cost of tickets, it's almost the same price to get down there sometimes as it is to get into the Buffalo Bills games, and it's a lot better weather. So
right, no, for sure. I get it. I get it. I do get it. I don't go to games often. I like to watch it on my TV when all my people come over to the house. So I do get it. I totally understand. Totally understand. Yeah, well, thank you again, guys. This has been Not Your Average Podcast in the 716 with T. And again, we're on Thursdays. Peace out, y'all. And always, I know you're not going to say it, but it's all good. Go Bills. Peace, y'all.